our state auditor. Chris is a former Assistant Secretary of Transportation for Innovation under Deval Patrick, and he's most recently been a director of the Transportation for Massachusetts Advocacy Coalition. Please do give your attention to Chris Dempsey.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity to join you all tonight, and it's also always an honor to share the stage with Tana Govea, and I'm sure you will enjoy hearing from her. So my name is Chris Dempsey, and I'm running for Massachusetts State Auditor because I believe that Massachusetts is the greatest state in the country, and we deserve a state government to match. And the State Auditor's Office is all about making state government more transparent, more accountable, more efficient, and more fair. It does that by taking a team of about 200 auditors and analysts and sending them into every corner of the executive branch of state government to figure out what's working, what's not working, and how things need to change. So you want a state auditor who has done two things. Number one, work in the executive branch to reform it and make it work better for you. And number two is a state auditor who has stood up to protect the public interest. And I've been fortunate to do both of those things in my career. They've been some of the most rewarding and meaningful experiences in my life. I'm the son of public school teachers, and apologies to folks who have heard this story before. We just had an event that Sam Hammer helped pull together for us, but I'm going to tell the joke again, and you all can laugh, hopefully as much the second time as the first time. My parents met while teaching at the Martin Luther King School in Boston in 1970. And they were placed in adjoining classrooms, and it was love at first sight. That's my dad's version of the story. That's where you guys can laugh. Thank you, Madam Mayor. My mom's version of the story is not so has the same conviction about love at first sight, but she eventually came around. And I was the result of that happy marriage, along with my little sister Allison, who is herself a public school teacher. And so I grew up in a family of teachers where we talked about the fact that, for example, they were digging into their own pockets to pay for school supplies for their students, as we know so many public school teachers do across the Commonwealth to this day. And that led to conversations like, why are we spending money in certain areas and not enough on public education? And that led me into a career of public service, in and around public service. As you heard in the introduction, I served as Assistant Secretary of Transportation for Governor Patrick and Lieutenant Governor Murray in the first term of the Patrick and Murray administration. While I was there, I co-founded the MassDoc program that created all the smartphone apps that tell you when your bus or train is going to arrive. I'm sure you will agree that the MBTA is not known as a place for innovation, but it was when I was there. We made the MBTA the very first transit agency on the entire East Coast to make those apps available to riders. And they have especially served bus riders well. You used to not know if your bus was 4 minutes away or 44 minutes away. And you were standing out in the cold and the rain and the snow without any idea. Now you have that information in the palm of your hand, and you can stay inside and warm and dry on a cold night like tonight and walk out to meet the bus as it arrives. So I've worked within state government to reform it, but I've also worked outside of state government to protect the public interest. Some of you will remember back in 2014 and 2015, there was a $15 billion proposal to bring the Olympics to Boston in 2024. And maybe for some of you that was an exciting idea. We've got a wonderful Commonwealth, we're a great sports region, why not show that off to the world? But then you start to read about the history of prior Olympic cities, about Montreal, which took 30 years to pay off its debt and is still left with a stadium that they don't use today, about Athens, Greece, where the venues there are literally crumbling to the ground because they don't have a use after that 3-week sporting event. And you read the fine print of the International Olympic Committee contract, which requires that host community taxpayers, all of us as state taxpayers, are responsible for 100% of the cost overruns of the Olympics. And every Olympics since 1960 has gone over budget. So that didn't sit right with me, growing up in a household where we weren't spending enough on public education, that we would spend $10 to $15 billion on a 3-week sporting event. So I co-founded in a living room, a group called No Boston Olympics. And we went up against some of the most powerful people in Massachusetts. John Fish, the owner of the largest construction company in Massachusetts, who was also named by Boston Magazine the most powerful Bostonian, was the chairman of that bid. Newly elected mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh, was working for that bid. Even my former boss, Deval Patrick, was working for that bid. We got outspent on that campaign 1,500 to 1. They spent $15 million to sell you that this was a good idea. We spent less than $10,000 on our side. We had 2 things going for us. Number 1 is we had those facts. We had all the information and data about prior Olympic cities. And number 2, more importantly, we had so many of you. We had regular citizens who came to our public meetings, went to our website, put bumper stickers on your car, even just talked to your friends and neighbors about your concerns with this $15 billion proposal. By the end of that campaign, we had more individual citizen contributors to our campaign than Boston 2024 had to its campaign. Our average contribution size was $100. Their average contribution size, was $100,000. But we were successful because of that grassroots effort and because of the wisdom of the people of Massachusetts. And that was my main takeaway from that experience. That if you put good information before the voters of Massachusetts, we tend to be a pretty savvy bunch. We tend to get things right. And that's what the state auditor does. Digs into every corner of the executive branch of state government, figures out what needs to change, makes recommendations for those changes, and then puts that information back into the public realm so that we can build a stronger Commonwealth through that process. We know that state government is not doing enough to address high housing costs, the climate crisis, our transportation crisis, and worst in the nation, traffic congestion. The list could go on and on and on. Let me give you one example of how the state auditor's office can help. I will make the office the first in the country to incorporate carbon accounting into our audits of relevant state agencies. And that will allow us to track how our agencies and their programs are doing against effectively a carbon budget that we now have in place because of the 2050 roadmap bill. We have pretty good laws on the books. We now need to do the harder work of actually implementing change to meet those requirements that are on the books. And the auditor's office can help shine a light on the gap between where we want to be and where we actually are. I know that Massachusetts state government, our Commonwealth, can and fix and tackle pressing problems like climate change and housing costs and all these other problems that we mentioned and that you can think of. And we can do that and make the Commonwealth work better for everyone, from Pittsfield to Provincetown. So I'm grateful for the chance to be with you tonight. I ask for your support in this race, in the Democratic primary in September of next year. Before that, we need you to run for a delegate in your caucus in February or March this year, attend the convention, volunteer for our campaign, help in any number of ways. And Carlos Garcia from our team has a clipboard. We'd love for you to sign up to help out. Thanks again for the chance to present to you tonight. Again, my name is Chris Dempsey, running for state auditor, and I welcome any questions if we have time in the chair office.
We have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you. Yes,
It's not
sir.
actually a question, it's more of a comment. I like the idea of a carbon audit because it will push things like the MBTA to electrify things like the trains and the buses that may not happen otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And the 2050 roadmap law, and Representative Gouveia had a hand in getting that passed. It requires emissions reductions not just from the operations of state government, like the buses, the T-runs, but it's even broader than that. It requires reductions from the industry or sectors that those agencies oversee. So MassDOT is required to reduce emissions from transportation. And we're gonna need even more action than just electrifying buses and trains, which of course we should do. But we also need to start talking about where most of the pollution comes from in transportation, which is our tailpipes of our automobiles.
Yeah, but I also commented it's a lot better that I've been in Melrose since 1988, and when I commuted into the city, it was an orange-brown dome over the entire city during the summer. I mean, you lived inside of it.
Yep.
growing up.
Questions for Mr. Dempsey? All right, well,
Thank you all, folks. I really appreciate the chance to be with you tonight.
Thank you, Chris, and our other special guest this evening has been seen in Melrose before. In fact, Tammy, I think this is your third time here. So we have Tammy Gavea, who is the state representative for the 14th district from Acton. So, Tammy.
I see Chris everywhere, just so you know, so it's a surprise that we're here again together this evening. So nice to see you. Thank you, James. Thank you, all of you, for being here. Really appreciate it. I am State Representative Tammy Gavea, and I'm running for Lieutenant Governor because I believe that we deserve leaders who put the health, the well-being, and the dignity of every single person in our Commonwealth at the center of the ways that we are making decisions. In a state that is as rich in resources, history, culture, and connectedness as we are here in Massachusetts, I see no reason why we aren't doing more for our working families. I grew up in the city of Lowell. My grandfather was in the Carpenters Union, which really put my family on a solid economic footing. It allowed my parents to buy a two-family home. They rented out the upstairs apartment to help stretch their salary and their wages while I was growing up. But so many of my classmates, my neighbors, my friends, their families were not nearly as lucky as I was. Families that, while growing up, that were struggling with substance use disorder and domestic violence, not getting the help that they needed. When I was in high school, I had a dear friend whose mom really struggled with medical racism, but undiagnosed for years with diabetes. She was in bed every single day in pain and did not get the diagnosis or the treatment that she deserved. Also, I had friends who did not have heat or hot water in the wintertime. I'm 47 years old. I share that with you so that you can understand that I was coming of age, 13, 14, 15 years old, when Lowell became a resettlement location for families fleeing the Khmer Rouge and the violence of that dictatorship. And so families were coming into my community and in my school and struggling, not only with the trauma and the experiences that they had as refugees, but then also getting slapped in the face with racism and xenophobia. So I saw these things as a young person, and it instilled in me a strong sense of empathy and a desire to go into public service. But I don't come from a family that's politically connected. I don't come from a family of wealth or influence. And so I became a public health social worker, and that's what I've been doing for the last 25 years. In 2007, I worked with city leadership to form the Lowell Roundtable on Substance Abuse Prevention. This was so early in the opioid crisis. I actually remember coming here when we were addressing OCs with Kara Showers right here in Melrose. I was doing that in a professional capacity. And then in my own city, we did not have a substance abuse prevention coalition, but all of the surrounding suburbs did. And so I approached the city manager, the superintendent of police, the heads of the hospitals and nonprofits, worked with parents and young people. And we formed that coalition, and within a year of forming it, we were able to secure $1 million in state and federal money to pass policies and implement programs to help our young people stay on a path of healthy decision-making and to increase access to the treatment that people needed in the city. And that coalition continues to exist to this day, went on to secure millions of dollars in funding. We know that we still have the opioid crisis that we're continuing to grapple with. Every single community across the Commonwealth has been touched by this issue. Lowell is certainly no exception to that. It wasn't long after forming this coalition that I became a single parent to my kids who were 6 and 3 years old at the time. They're now 20 and they're 17, and they're doing as good as can be given everything that's going on in the world, the climate crisis, the pandemic, education, all the things that are going on. But overall, they're doing pretty well. But we really struggled in the last, 12 years of me living as a single mom. Struggled financially, and the emotional toll and the mental toll that comes with income insecurity. I had $60 oftentimes for my grocery budget. Medical insecurity because of the way that our healthcare system is not working. I was underinsured and had medical debt that I needed to figure out how to pay off. I also struggled with what's going to happen if my car breaks down? How am I going to get myself to work? How am I going to get my kids to school? So the struggles that so many families are experiencing right now because of the pandemic, and so many, quite frankly, of our families, particularly our low-income families, our communities of color, and our immigrant families, those struggles are things that I've also experienced. I was also unemployed not long after this because of the financial struggles that we had in the Commonwealth. And so I experienced what it means to go through some of the systems that are supposed to be designed to help people, but they're not really working in that way. I knew that I would land on my feet though, because I grew up here, I speak the language, I'm white, and I'm educated. And I did land back on my feet. I became the executive director of Tobacco Free Mass and moved to the town of Acton, which was a really great landing place for myself and my 2 kids. 4 years ago, I ran for state representative. 3 years ago, I was sworn in on behalf of representing the 14th Middlesex District, which includes Concord, Carlisle, Chelmsford, and Acton. And I'm so incredibly proud to represent this district, but there's so many needs that I see across our Commonwealth. And so I'm running for Lieutenant Governor to be a bridge between the corner office and every single corner in our state, taking my experience as a public health social worker, as a single mom, as a legislator, and I finished my doctorate in public health in August of 2020. I dare say that we need someone with my qualifications in the corner office to get us through the rest of this pandemic and ensure that our recovery is a just one and that we are addressing the issues and the crises that we're facing. We have unreliable transportation systems. Our housing crisis, I hear about it in every single community I have visited across the state, and I've already visited a third of the state. So I'm hearing it repeatedly over and over and over again. Of course, our climate emergency we know is already upon us. Our child care crisis, even before the pandemic hit, we were 25,000 workers short of what we needed for every single system throughout our Commonwealth. And now we know that the pandemic has really wreaked havoc on our child care system. So these and so many issues, we need to bring people with different kinds of experience and perspective into government to think about these issues and to bring forward new ideas. Because what I see coming out of the Baker-Polito administration far too often are people who think small and think similarly and approach the problems with the same kind of solutions. And we need to blow that up and have more innovative thinkers and people with lived experience coming in and sharing what is going to make their lives easier. How will they be able to get up the economic rung? Because we know that Massachusetts, we are facing such severe income inequality, and it is so difficult for working families, low-income families, to move up the economic ladder. So that's why I'm running for Lieutenant Governor. I hope to earn your support. I hope you will run to be a delegate in the caucuses. We hope that you will get involved in our campaign. Kimberly has already passed around the clipboard. If you didn't have a chance to sign it, and now after hearing me, you want to sign up, we would love that. We would welcome that. But for now, I look forward to answering your questions. And I have been here 3 times, and I'll keep coming back to Melrose. It's such a great community, and I thank you all for listening this evening.
Questions for Rep. Gouveia?
Yes.
What could a Democratic administration do at the state level in regards to the affordable housing crisis that we're kind of experiencing with us?
Yeah, I think we're thinking way too small about the issues. I think there's a number of interesting things that I've heard across the state. So in some parts of our state where tourism is a bigger consideration, they're seeing their neighborhoods change completely because of Airbnb. And what's happening is there used to be streets where kids would be playing in the street, running into each other's yards, and that's not happening anymore. And it's not just because, work has changed and we've changed culturally, but it's now so many of the houses that are on those streets are sitting empty, waiting for someone to come and use it as a short-term rental. So taking a look at how do we address that give a policy solution to that kind of a problem. Also, the mass and CAS encampments that we see, driven by homelessness and unmet mental health and substance use needs, Those encampments are happening all across the Commonwealth. They're in Waltham, they've grown in Lowell, they're in Falmouth, they're in Northampton. We are not talking about what we're seeing at Mass and Cass as a statewide issue. We need to be having that kind of conversation if we want to make sure that we are supporting people and not increasing homelessness, particularly as the cold weather comes, from a humane perspective, and as we're still in the midst of this pandemic. I talked to a real estate tech expert who told me that the ways that our data is being used as we're looking at houses, maybe we're in the market for buying a house, our data gets used, and it's getting used to increase sales prices over time. I bought a house last year. It already has increased 25%. And I know that it has not, in effect, really increased 25%. There's something going on with the market again, and we have not fully wrapped our arms around that. So I think having a Democratic leadership in the corner office, we will start to really dig into those issues much more deeply. Because if you look at when Baker vetoed the Next Gen Climate Bill, and he vetoed it 4 times, every time he vetoed it, the money that went into, in particular, Karen Polito's campaign account from the developers and real estate investors really increased. And there was a study that came out of Brown University that was looking at what are the industries in Massachusetts that are blocking climate change policies. And the real estate industry was 6th on the list. So there's a lot going on with the real estate industry. And no offense if anybody is in here who's a real estate agent. I have a lot of friends who are real estate agents, so it's not everybody. But there's a lot more that we need to understand about the bad actors and what might be going on. The other thing I'll just say is that it's also not just about housing, but it's also what's happening with our retail spaces and our downtown spaces. Because there's so many investors coming in who are buying up retail space as well as housing. Because there's no way that working families that I know of are going into every single community that I see, including in Lowell, putting down $100,000 over asking and waiving inspection. I don't know a single family who's working really hard for their dollars is going to go in and waive inspection. So I have a lot of questions about why is what is happening, why is it happening in the ways that it is. And I think it's because we're not always asking the right questions, and we're not always bringing the right kinds of experts in to look at those problems and come up with solutions. So that's how I see that. Democrats coming in, very different. Other questions? Yes, David.
So this is more for your current job. Can you give a push to get the voting, early voting and all those things? I know that bill's sitting there waiting, it's about to expire. As a poll worker, it would be great if you can give a push because I see differences, you know. It's helped with turnout, it's a whole lot of things. And also, I want to say that I'm also a fan of same-day registration. I was in shock when our governor said he wants poll workers to count votes. And that's illegal. I can't count votes till the polls close at 8 o'clock. During the day, I'm supposed to help people vote. And he was so out of touch when he said that. I believe we should have same-day registration to get more people out there to do it. And like I said, I was shocked that the governor said that. He was so out of touch with what a poll worker really does.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully support same-day registration. I support the Votes Act. I have submitted testimony in support of it last session in the middle of at the beginning of the pandemic, and we were trying to figure out how to make sure we could have municipal elections up and running and making sure that people had opportunities to go and vote in person and do it safely. I filed legislation to make sure that that was happening. Also to expand early voting into weekends and evening hours, and just making sure that we were doing all that we could to support same-day registration, but particularly our students, right? Our students who are arriving, we have over 100 colleges in the state of Massachusetts. We receive 1 million students who go to college every single year in our state. And so one of the things that I advocated for pretty fiercely with the chair of the elections committee last session, it was John Lawn, to make sure that our students had those opportunities. I'm not convinced that we're going to see same-day registration. There's a lot of resistance to it, particularly from electeds and incumbents, to be quite frank. So one of the things that my team talked about the other day is how can we start to work with the colleges and universities to make sure that when they are sending out notices to students who are arriving on campus, that they're including a link to the site to be able to register. It's not the perfect solution, I get that, we need to keep advocating for same-day registration, but I think there's some opportunities for us to also look at some interesting ways to increase voter access, particularly for populations that move around a lot more and are more transient. The other thing is canvassing in low-income communities and communities of color. They get ignored so often. People tell me, as someone who's running statewide, don't waste your time in gateway cities. I'm totally ignoring that advice because I believe in inclusive democracy, and that means we need to be going where people are not necessarily always asked for their vote and showing up to vote, because we've made it incredibly difficult for people to do so. So I appreciate your advocacy, and I appreciate that you've served as a poll worker.
I want to change hats for a second, though. Take
Sure.
off my poll worker hat and put my Democratic hat on.
Yeah.
Those students, if they're from Virginia, I prefer that they register and vote at home.
I hear you, but when they go low, we go high? I don't know. Thank you so much, James. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Veterans, when you're struggling, soon becomes later, becomes someday, becomes when. Don't wait. Reach out.
Find resources at va.gov/reach.
Guess what? I have some news for you. There's free food right there, junk food. Do you see that truck? Oh, jeez. It's a 2 Michelin star chef. All for free, ladies and gentlemen. All for free.
Here we have a panzanella with summer vegetables and pesto. Enjoy. How we doing?
So what do you got going on underneath that plate there?
This food is really about to be thrown away.
Yeah. Bro?
Is there something wrong with this food? Where did you get it from?
From farmers markets. They put aside the ugly vegetables and the ugly fruits.
Carrot top, soft avocados. It was all food that was going to be discarded.
Even the drink you had is made from like a little bruised peach. Did it taste a little bruised?
Great. It was good.
The average person throws away 24 pounds of food a month.
That's a lot.
Isn't that a lot? Go visit savethefood.com for more information. Thank you. Junk food time!
Stem is precise, no margin for error.
Dare to forget that. Dare to have fun with it. Get weird with it. Dare to load their minds. Dare to explore. Dare to STEM. Learn more at She Can STEM.